In this short film, I will introduce the term post-colonialism. I will explain its relevance in a Nordic context. I will give a few examples of what can be studied under the umbrella term of Nordic post-colonialism, and I will try to explain how the notion can be used as an analytic tool. Colonialism means the domination of a territory, of its people, and its resources by a foreign power. Post-colonialism means the relationship between former colonizers and former colonized, and all the traces that colonialism has left in the former colonies. Post-colonialism can also be understood as an analytic tool or as a perspective with which to look at all these legacies. The term post-colonialism has been criticized by many because it implies that there is a after colonialism, that we're talking about a time that is over, when what we are witnessing all around the world is repercussions of colonial power relations or neo-colonialism, that means new forms of foreign disposition over land or human and non-human resources. This is why many prefer the term decolonial to post-colonial to address all those issues and act against them. So, what is now the relevance of all this in a Nordic context, and what is perhaps special about Nordic post-colonialism? The first thing to be said about Nordic post-colonialism is perhaps that the region is very often still perceived as a region that is untainted by colonialism. When I tell people about my research in Scandinavian colonialism, I very often get the reaction, is there such a thing? Did the Scandinavian countries really have any colonies? Scandinavians often tend to have quite limited knowledge about, for instance, Greenland or the transatlantic slave trade or the indigenous Sami people of northern Scandinavia. There still persists an understanding of the Scandinavian countries that they differ from other countries in this respect, or that they are even exceptional when it comes to issues of violence, of domination or exploitation. The term Nordic exceptionalism has been coined to address those narratives and images. So the first issue to address when one talks about Nordic post-colonialism is the extent to which it is acknowledged at all that Norden has been and still is part of a world order that is shaped by colonial relationships and colonial economies. In other words, to address Norden as a post-colonial region is itself contested. So, what can be studied under the umbrella of Nordic post-colonialism? First, it is the relationships between the Scandinavian countries and the former colonies. I will give you 4 examples. The first one would be a Scandinavian tourism to the former colonies in the Caribbean, or to study the remnants of colonialism, of colonial trade and administration in today's India and how they have been turned into tourist sites. One can also study or look at politics and diplomacy, for instance, at the current debate about independence in Greenland, or about claims for apologies or reparations for slavery that Denmark faces in their relationship with the US Virgin Islands, the former Danish West Indies. As a third example, archaeologists and historians are currently busy digging out the remnants of the Danish colonial period in and around the Christiansborg Castle or Ozu Castle in Accra in Ghana. The former Danish fort used to be a presidential palace and the seat of the Ghanaian government until recently. Not least, there is a growing number of literature, of performances, of artworks, of films dealing with Nordic colonial history and its all its legacies. And generally speaking, one could perhaps say that art is the foremost arena where one can learn about Nordic post-colonialism. The second issue that can be studied with the lens of Nordic post-colonialism is broader issues of race relations and cultural encounters, many of which can be traced back to colonial thought and colonial practices. Again, a few examples. The first example would be the National Association of Afro-Swedes, in Swedish Afrosvenskarnas Riksförbund. They are very active in the commemoration of slavery on the Swedish West Indian island of Saint-Barthélemy during the 18th and 19th century. They try to find out if today's occurrences of racism or Afrophobia can be linked to ideologies of the colonial times. Second, many representatives of the indigenous Sami people regularly use the word colonialism to describe the ongoing struggles or debates with the nation-state institutions in Finland, Sweden, and Norway. And these struggles often pertain to the use of land for traditional livelihoods, such as reindeer husbandry, but also to the preservation or revitalization of Sami languages, of cultural heritage, of place names. Furthermore, researchers and activists have begun to investigate how Nordic identities can be connected to conceptions of whiteness. That is, how national or regional belonging has been tied to imaginations of racial or ethnic homogeneity. As a third complex, we can use post-colonialism as a new lens through which to look at Norden with new eyes. That means that it has the potential to change the ways we perceive of the region or change our mental maps of the region. For instance, we can look afresh at the North Atlantic archipelago, Greenland, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, Orkney and Shetland, and their complex relations with mainland Scandinavia since the Viking Age and until the present. We can try and imagine Scandinavia without nation-state borders if we try and adopt a view from Sápmi, where people and animals have roamed long before those borders were drawn. And last but not least, we can explore and embrace the shared history of Scandinavians with Indians, Caribbeans, or Africans.